Hello, and welcome to Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation.
I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu.
The Sharjah Art Foundation is an advocate, catalyst, and producer of contemporary art within the Emirate of Sharjah and the surrounding region. In dialogue with the international arts community, the Foundation advances an experimental and wide-ranging programmatic model that supports the production and presentation of contemporary art, preserves and celebrates the distinct culture of the region, and encourages a shared understanding of the transformational role of art. Organized by the Foundation, Sharjah Biennial's 16th edition, SB16, convenes under the title To Carry, a multivocal and open-ended proposition, exploring the ever-expanding questions of what it means to carry and how to carry it. SB16 is an invitation to encounter the different formations and positions of the 5 curators, as well as the constellation of resonances they have gathered. Curated by Aliyah Swastika, Amal Khalaf, Megan Tamati Quinnell, Natasha Jin, and Zainab Oz, the biennial unveiled more than 650 works by nearly 200 participants, including more than 200 new commissions. The biennial was launched on February 6, 2025, and will continue through June 15, 2025. During this exclusive capsule season, I'll engage in dialogue and discourse with artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial who are presenting new commissions. Throughout the series, you'll hear from artists across the globe, from Australia and Kenya to London and Nigeria and more. You'll hear us discuss a wide range of topics, from each artist's practice to their reflections on our society and the questions they investigate through their work. Please join me as I share these dynamic conversations with you, exploring the ins and outs and inner worlds of artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial with their newly commissioned works. Let's go! On this episode, I'm joined by Rita Mawuena Benissan as we discuss her newly commissioned works presented for the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, elucidated through the curatorial theme To Carry, asking questions such as, what does it mean to carry a home, a history, a language, a legacy, and a lineage? Born in Abidjan, Cote D'Ivoire in 1995 to Ghanaian parents, Rita's journey led her to the United States as a baby. In her later years, she earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in Apparel and Textile Design from Michigan State University in 2017, followed by a Master of Fine Arts in Photography and African Studies from the University of Wisconsin in 2021. Rita is a Ghanaian-American interdisciplinary artist on a mission to reimagine the royal umbrella, transforming it from a mere protective object into a potent symbol of Ghanaian identity. With a profound passion for art and cultural history, Rita collaborates with traditional artisans to breathe life into archival photos, immortalizing individual figures and communal scenes while embodying the beauty and power of her people. In this episode, Rita discusses her newly commissioned work, You Must Cross and Seek. The installation features photography, video, sound works, and her well-known umbrella works. Rita explains how the title and the works reflect themes of ancestral calls, cultural legacy, and the fishing community in the Volta region where her family is from. She emphasizes the need for cultural preservation, especially through her foundation, Sihene, which focuses on documenting and archiving Ghanaian chieftaincy and traditional culture. Rita also discusses the challenges of accessing cultural archives and the importance of creating spaces for contemporary African art, urging a collaborative approach between communities and institutions. Let's dive into my next episode with Rita Mawuena Benissan.
My name is Rita Mawuena Benissan. I'm a visual artist and cultural historian based in Accra, Ghana.
Rita, I'm so happy to have you join me on an episode of Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition. This special capsule season is all about speaking with artists who are participating in the Sharjah Biennial 16 with newly commissioned works. You have a new commission titled You Must Cross and Seek. It features photography, installations, your well-known umbrella works, among other works you've included in the presentation. Can we start by talking about the title and how you came up with the title of the installation and the diversity of works that are being showcased?
Yes, once Natasha, my curator, contacted me about the themes she was looking into within the theme of the Sharjah Biennale, which is to carry. And she really loved the works that I usually do, which is just the royal umbrellas, archival works as well. I wanted to be able to embody something that was the research of the royal umbrellas in Ghana, but also to create a way where I'm honoring my own legacy. Within my works, I usually focus on the Ashanti Kingdom and region of Ghana within their royal chieftaincy and history. But I felt that because the Sharjah Biennale was really about the ancestral call, spiritual processes, I really wanted to also connect to my own legacy, which is in the Volta region of Ghana. My grandfather was a chief in the Volta region, and I felt this is another way for me to expand my research, expand my practice, but also go more in depth about my own cultural legacy. And so you must cross and seek is mostly like a call to action for individuals, the viewers, to be able to see themselves beyond land. If the ancestors called them, would they answer? Would they follow the ancestral call? And also to really reimagine the chieftaincy beyond land. How do we see the chieftaincy within these folktale stories and these communities? Because You Must Cross and Seek focuses on the fishing community in the Volta region and how they positioning them as chiefs, positioning them as linguistics, and different councils that the chieftaincy court has. But being able to now really have the viewers in general to really see themselves within this position where they're getting a call from the ancestors saying that you must cross and seek into this new life. And this new life could be anything. It could be crossing to be an ancestor themselves, crossing to become a chief or a queen mother, to cross into this new position in their life. So anyone can see it in a different perspective, but now being able to use these umbrellas, we have a fringe umbrella that kind of embodies these blue fringe and gold pendant fishes that kind of symbolizes what the chieftaincy could be in a fishing community. The fishermen had umbrellas, but then we had this white umbrella that, like, the color white is a very spiritual color. And so being able to actually have this umbrella be an ancestral umbrella where you see a film projected on there, you see these ancestors, you hear these ancestral voices, you see this fisherman dealing with that question within his own terms of would he answer that call, would he cross? And he does cross. And then you have an embroidery tapestry that also embodies the scenery of what this position could be in. And then you have the photos also to respond to the film, but also the environment in general. And then lastly, we have the stools, the throne that is waiting for the viewer to sit. And then we have a wooden fish that also symbolizes that this person has crossed and they're accepting this new life.
That is such a rich and deep explanation of a lot of the things you're thinking about in this single installation. I really want to go back to you bringing up Natasha Jeanwala. It's Jeanwala, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so bad with names, but I want to go back to that because you mentioned the theme to carry, which we'll get to in the conversation. But the curatorial theme to carry encapsulates so much. And on each episode of the show, I've been asking participants, what does that mean to them? It's such a big and layered question, and it has so
Yes,
many implications. But one of the things I wanted to touch on now is the idea of cultural preservation. And as someone who was born in Abidjan to
yes.
Ghanaian parents and then moved to the US, and potentially, because I don't know all of your story, but I would imagine that connecting and being having a deep working understanding of your Ghanaian heritage has probably been something that's always important to you. Yes, and through the way that you've talked about your work, the idea of the chieftaincy, your grandfather, this direct lineage that you come from, a direct line of ancestors that you come from that has been in Ghana in the Volta region for generations.
Exactly.
Why is cultural preservation important to you?
Cultural preservation is important to me because I think with my journey, there was always a disconnect. There's a lot of people who have Ghanaian parents or African parents living in Africa, but then they're raised outside. So there's always a disconnect between how you see your culture, how do you see your heritage, your identity, but then also how your family sees it and how you were raised. You're so close to it, but then you're also so distant to it as well. Because even for me, I was able to come back to Ghana as an adult during graduate school. That was where I fully was able to actually learn how do I embody my identity and my art practice together, where now I'm not just making art for art's sake, but I'm actually making art to preserve what that disconnect was within. We did define what does it mean to be Ghanaian? What is the power and the rich history that we have? And how do I use my art, especially with the umbrellas, to be able to preserve these stories? Having my grandfather passed away before I could meet him, but my mom will always share stories and photos of him. And even within that process of me learning about these royal umbrellas and what gave power to Ghanaians through the chieftaincy, it also helped her become an archivist. It was like a kind of a full circle moment where, yes, I'm learning how to preserve my culture and my heritage and my identity through my art practice. Through me, my mom is also learning, okay, it's actually very important to preserve these stories and these photos, these regalias that her father had. So it felt that it wasn't just a process that I was doing by myself. It was a process that my family was also helping me with. I felt like it was a full on collaboration, which I really enjoyed.
And that's so beautiful. The curatorial theme, five curators, all women from the global south, working around a shared idea. The first time in the Sharjah Biennial's history that's happened in 32 years. And then speaking about the idea of there's a sense of collaboration that you're leaning
Yeah.
into when you speak about this dynamic between you and your mom, and how the work you do independently as an artist can inform how she understands herself in the world, right? Through your research.
Oh, yeah, it's very true. And even beyond me creating these works, I also collaborate with traditional umbrella makers. These are umbrella makers that still make the umbrellas to this day and even beyond generations before me. Like their grandsons, their nephews, the fathers, the grandfathers. So I feel like it's an endless collaboration that's always just happening because now they're not just making these umbrellas for the chiefs, but now they're also being able to preserve their process of making within my contemporary perspective. There's so many different ways that collaboration is happening within my practice where it's a family collaboration of history and knowledge, but it's also a creative production collaboration as well because now these umbrella makers in Kumasi are not just seeing themselves as makers, but they're seeing themselves as artists. Umbrella crafters are not just making umbrellas that might not be seen to the general public, but it's not a space where working with Rita, they're able to see their artworks being used, presented, and displayed and exhibited all over the world. People are acknowledging these are not just umbrellas that are just a protector's objects, but they're an umbrella that gives people power, and people feel power because of them as well.
Yes. I want to go back a little bit to you spoke earlier as you were describing you must cross and seek your installation. You spoke about the ancestral umbrellas, and just
Yes,
now you spoke about the film being projected onto the
yes,
umbrella. And this idea of what I picked up on was the idea of an ancestor who is communicating with someone in the present through the film that's being projected on the umbrella. There's this possible exchange, a dialogue, a conversation that's happening between the viewer who's engaging with the work and the film that's being shown that is maybe highlighting something very specific. Can you talk a little bit more about what the film is? Is it archival? Does it come from an older period in Ghana's history? Can you speak about some of your aesthetic choices and some of these artistic and design choices that inform how you conceived of the installation itself?
Yes, the film You Must Cross and Seek, a film that we actually produced that year, well, last year, in preparations for Sharjah. So I was able to work with the fishing community. I went to Togo last year, February, and from Ghana to Togo, I think it's 3 hour drive. And coming back to Ghana, I was able to go into this town called Denu, and I was looking outside my window, the car window. I was like, oh, there's these fishermen that are just swaying back and forth, swaying back and forth. And I think that was a couple months before we finalized what the exhibition or the installation will be. So I was like, oh no, I need to like record this. So I went and talked to them. They were saying like praise singing like that they caught fishes today, or this is the amount of fishes that they got. So they were just swaying back and forth to collect the fish from the sea. You have over 20 or 40 men swaying back and forth. I felt like that was performance art because they're bringing in something unknown. They don't know what they're about to catch, but they need to pull together. I felt that was one of the foundational aspects of the film. Incorporate the singing that they're doing, but then also poetry to bring this all together to talk about how this ancestral call is being done and the choices we might have within our daily lives of these fishermen. I thought it was better to make a film that didn't have archival footage because sometimes it's really hard to find out. So it was better for this project to do one inspired by things I was seeing and interacting with, but then thinking about the installation. So within the installation, we have the white platform that is under the umbrella, and the exhibition is blue. But usually you have a white platform that the king will sit on, and then his court or other sub chiefs will be around it. And I felt that was a very important element to have in the exhibitions. I use it in all my exhibitions because it also puts everyone else in a different environment. They're not just in a white cube space or gallery, but now they're actually transformed. That platform now changes the environment that the viewer are not interacting with. And then being able to even have the lingering fishnets on the ground, the sand also embodies that environment because I felt like it would just been umbrellas and that would be it. But people might not really get the environment or the scenery in general. But I felt like it was very important for me to use these small elements that are used in the fishing community in this space to really embody what the viewers are engaging in.
Yeah, thinking about that is helpful to ground me and all the listeners in the things you're investigating in your practice, especially when it comes to an immersive experience. I think there are times when you have conversations with artists and you'll hear an artist speak about the way they are thinking about their work from their perspective.
Exactly.
Then you hear something very different when you listen to an artist describe what they're hoping to achieve or what they're thinking about when they're considering their
Yes.
audience,
Yes.
right? They're thinking through if someone is moving through a space, if the work that I am creating is allowing them to tap into an emotion, feel something, pull on a history, learn something new, if I'm giving them this opportunity to have a new experience, what experience do I want them to have? And I think in hearing you speak about the things that you thought and felt were important to include and why you felt that those things were important. That's also very valuable to unearth and understand the way an artist is thinking about the experience of the viewer.
Yes.
I'd like to switch gears a little with the last few minutes and ask you about the curatorial
Mhm.
theme, which is so rich and so dynamic. The curatorial theme to carry it can just open up so many doors of thoughts and ideas. What does the curatorial theme to carry mean to you?
Yes. So the curatorial thing to carry means to me, it means that me as an artist, me as a Ghanaian, me as an umbrella maker, I'm able to carry these histories, these voices, these narratives, this power within my work through the umbrellas, through these photos, through these tapestry works, where each thread holds these narratives of the makers, holds the narratives of these fishermen within the process. So I'm not just a observer or a viewer in art practice, but now I'm actually being able to carry these individuals, these practices, these ancestors as well within my work to the viewer. In a way, it's like I'm a moderator within that process between the viewer and the ancestors. I'm able to hold the space where these individuals can be in the same room and interact with each other.
In 2020, Rita, you established Sihene, a foundation dedicated to preserving Ghana's chieftaincy and traditional culture. Will you speak a bit about that and why you decided to take this
Mhm.
approach and dedicate your time and commitment to this? And also, specifically, why the chieftaincy is so important to you?
Yeah, during grad school, I decided to expand my research within the research I was doing with the Royal Umbrellas. And during that time, I was going back and forth to Ghana and the US. And I had so many of these books that I was recommended to read and look at different databases that had areas of the chieftaincy or Ghana's traditional culture within some of the institutions, universities, and databases. And that was also a time of COVID. We were all stuck at our house. We weren't really allowed to go to museums, institutions, or even our own university. So I was like, oh, I have all these books, I have all these photos, I have my scanner, I have my phone, my laptop. So I was like, oh, for me to continue to keep my research going, COVID couldn't stop my research. I was still a graduate student. I still had to graduate. How do I keep myself accountable on the progression that I'm making where I can still like make work from my house, but then still do the research aspect without having a physical professor saying, okay, Rita, do this paper or write this article. So I decided to make an Instagram page. I was inspired by Sunu Journals of Amy Sell and Deborah Willis. I'm a big fan of her books about Blackness. I could even do something similar within the chieftaincy just because it still connects to my research within the royal umbrellas. But now I'm able to dig deeper into these different positions that our elders, our ancestors had back then. I realized that using my university email, I had so much access to so many databases, photographs, videos, and articles. When I was in Ghana, there wasn't any access to these archives. I was confused about this. Why is there a big gap between how much access Ghanaians in their own country have to their own history to the amount of access that Western institutions, Western students, historians, everyday people have access to our own history? So that also inspired me to use Instagram as a way to create this accessible platform. Henny was a name that I just used because it was a title of one of my artworks that I did. And I decided to use that name because I want people to feel that each time they look at one of my photos or archives on Instagram or go to one of our events, that they feel installed, that they feel that they're a king or a queen for that day or moment. So in a way, you're reclaiming power within these communities, these photographs, through these archival conversations. And I think that's the baseline of how Sihene started. And now we're 5 years in. It has been such an amazing journey because we've been able to have work on different projects with Open Society Foundation on the conversation of restitution. We also held a community archiving workshop last year in honor of James Barnard's, which is a Ghanaian British photographer celebrating his 95th birthday. And then now we're also establishing a cultural center in Accra where this conversation goes beyond Instagram, it goes beyond social media platforms, but now it can be something that people can interact with these archives, this history, this culture on a daily.
What a project! And I love that your artistic practice and asking questions about traditional culture and how you were having difficulty accessing it. Western institutions were providing places where you could see that information much more
Mhm.
readily. versus being right back in Ghana and to not have the same level of access. What an observation and experience that must have been
Yes.
like. That could bring up so many ideas. One could be the need and the necessity for institutions in Accra, in across Ghana and the continent to provide more access to individuals to learn and unearth their own histories. Another thing it brings up is the complicated nature of Western institutions holding on to the archives and the cultural history of African nations, and that this is quite problematic in many
Yeah.
ways. Others might argue that if African institutions are not readily available for citizens to access their archival histories, their cultural histories and traditions, that there must be a place for individuals to discover information through the archive. And I think there are arguments across all sides that are definitely valid. But I find that in learning a bit more about restitution and institution building on the continent, listening to people speaking about why they argue that items should not be brought back to the continent. Some argue Africa doesn't have institutions, so why should items be brought back to maybe change hands in political governments? There's a lot of complexity around this issue. I'd love to hear more about you just sharing your thoughts about that, but also how important it is for individual people to take up the reins of starting grassroots organizations, starting foundations, having a very clear mission of what you want to achieve and working towards that goal, and how a new generation of young professionals can be the ones who build the institutions that are needed all across the continent.
Yes. Like you said, there's always going to be this very complex conversation about who deserves ownership. We might not have as much African institutions to hold these artifacts or objects, but at the end of the day, we also have to say that they don't need to go back to these museums or institutional spaces, but they should also just go back to the homes of these chieftaincy families. When they were first looted, they weren't looted from institutions. They were looted in people's homes. And they weren't in glass casings. They were usable. Some of them were stools that the chiefs families were using, or some of them were cloth that were being worn. So at the end of the day, they still have a foundational usage that Western institutions might not fully understand or explain. But for us, to the everyday Ghanaian, they hold an essence where, oh yeah, we use stools to sit on, or we use stools to honor this ancestor or to honor our grandfathers. But even if you think about archives within photographs, the photos we were posting are of people's grandfathers, grandmothers, aunts, and uncles that they have never seen, especially in the royal regalia. I think there was one situation where I felt maybe I'm too into this because I felt that, oh, people were saying, oh, Rita, you posted a photo of my grandfather. Oh, I have never seen this photo of him like this. And I was very scared because at the end of the day, yes, this is my research, but these are also people's legacies and family members. You have to also make sure that, yes, an institution might say, okay, this person was a Ghanaian chief or an Akan chief, and then that's it. But in a way, you also have to be able to explain more in depth about who this individual is, because once you subject them to what institution would name them, that's taking away their identity, that's taking away their power. So how do you now being able to work with the community where the community can now actually contribute to these postings where they're saying, oh, you can expand this information by stating this is this town that they're from, or this is the family name they're a part of. So I feel like it's a cycle that goes back into these institutions, a young person or older person that's working on these type of projects, but then back into the community and family members that are saying, oh, this is the right information, or these are possible narratives. That also enhances what metadating or cataloging will be, because then it also goes back into these objects where we can say that we have the Kan Kente, El Kente, or other fabrications that might come directly from a family lineage. Instead of saying this person needs this, I feel like there needs to be a conversation of how do we contribute to each other's stories? How do we work with these museum institutions? How does the museum work with the communities? My art practice is showcasing works in galleries, but now you're also placing Ghana and this chief of history or the royal history. You're not going through a museum scavenger hunt to find where the African art is, because now you're placing a royal umbrella or a tapestry that has a reference to an archival photograph. You're placing these individuals and these objects front and center because, yes, it's a historical artifact, a contemporary artwork. So now people have ways to figure out how do we create accessibility, not just in our country, but even for Africans or Ghanaians outside, where they don't need to wait, but it's a very objective view of what African art is. So I feel like I try to create that cycle where we're working with the community, we are then working with the institutions who are working with me to be able to say, okay, how do we display this that is in light of what the community will also like, in light of what the families will also want, and protect the legacies. Because when you think about restitution, a lot of these artifacts are hidden in these museum collections that you will never know about. So how do you also play around with that situation as well?
Can you speak a little bit more about how Siheni functions over the last 5 years? You spoke about events, you also spoke about your individual practice. And so I'm imagining that on the one side, there's a foundation that is somewhat contained in terms of its programming and its mission and its activities. And then there's your individual art practice. I could see that maybe at some points they
Yeah.
overlap, but at other points they're completely separate. So could you share more about how the foundation has developed over the last 5 years, and also how do you engage currently?
At first, I used to try to keep Siheni and my practice separate, but then I realized it's very hard to do just because they go so long. Like they're two in one. Because when you see my artworks, you also see Siheni. And when you see Siheni, you also see my artworks. For Siheni, I always try to do at least one big event a year. So last year we had the archiving workshop. The year before that, we had the Open Society Foundation's restitution conference. And the years before that, we were still like, I was still like posting on Instagram, or maybe I would do like virtual talks with other organizations. So they weren't as big as Open Society or celebrating James Barnard's 95th birthday, but at least they still contributed to having conversations and small events or exhibitions. I think I grew more as an artist as well, being able to work with like Gallery 1957, where we had a opening reception. I think it was 2 years ago. We actually had a traditional chief from the Ashanti region come and perform and dance. We had a procession, and we actually had a dress code where people had to wear traditional wear or kente. And it was amazing because it was a celebration of our history. It was a celebration of the chief. It was a way for people to be comfortable in their traditional wear in a very contemporary art space, which you usually don't ever see. And even to be able to have a chief to come and perform also elevated how do we interact with my art practice, but also see Henny with taking individuals to a traditional space in a contemporary space, if that makes sense. So I've been able to I'm still like the founding director of Siheni. Within the first few years, I was posting like every single day on Instagram. But now I decided to just put a pause just so that I want people to be able to now say, okay, I'm waiting for a Siheni event. And then we can post those interactions and post event experiences. Now that we're acquiring a space for our permanent cultural space for Siheni, the space will also have my art studio. So it's an opportunity for people to see me in practice beyond seeing what I post or an exhibition I have. It's a way for people to really see, okay, he's working with the community within the embroidering process. These are her references. But then it's also a way for people to experience a pre-exhibition in Ghana before maybe it's exhibited globally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really it's an incredible project that you've taken on, and to share that importance of preserving traditional culture and also thinking about the ways in which the Ghanaian chieftaincy is interwoven into Ghanaian society
Yes.
overall, in addition to government, politics, things of that nature. And have there been, as a final question before we wrap, have there been any surprises, anything particularly surprising or meaningful that you've experienced over the course of founding the foundation and working to build it over the last 5 years? Anything that sticks out to you that surprised you in the process?
I think there's various ones. I feel like when we think about even just, I've been able to really realize that access is not just about Ghana not having access to Western institutions, but even the power that access has in Ghana itself. You have the government, you have policies, you have all these things that might not have these archives accessible to the community, or it might be accessible to a particular group of people. And even for that particular group of people, how do they create a space where it's accessible to the everyday person? Because there's so many different privileges that each of us have, even if it's from language, from the class that we are, our working class, our home class, even families, because when you think about the cheapancy, it starts from your family home. So I think that's one thing that really has opened it up, because I felt like, oh, when I started the project, I was just focusing on, okay, the separation that we have from the country and then Western institutions. But I think now that I moved back home, I realized that there's might be another bigger problem or a complex situation where now we have to see, how do we create a system where accessibility is learned and taught and seen throughout our communities in the country of Ghana. Because there might be times where some universities or even some schools are not teaching Ghanaian history or culture to their students. So, which is now saying, okay, how do we now create or contribute to the infrastructure of that? Even within the museums that we have in Ghana, what are they showcasing? What are they exhibiting? How do the everyday person that's going to these exhibitions interact with these objects in these spaces? And do they remember it? Is it something that's worth remembering? Because those are all ways of how we interact with our culture. One thing I've seen in Ghana is that I feel like we acknowledge the outsiders coming in Ghana first. Once they acknowledge Ghana, that's how we acknowledge it. But then that means that we're acknowledging from a Western perspective, or just giving awareness that maybe someone from outside says that, okay, we need to put more energy in showcasing this particular object or cloth, like maybe kente or Dutch wax fabric. How do we now say we need to take ownership of what we showcase and what we exhibit and how we tell our narrative? We don't need to wait for an outsider to say, oh, let's focus on this. Or because even for restitution, the restitution has been going on for the longest time, but now there's so much exposure of restitution in Ghana because it's now being talked about globally. I feel like accessibility and the ownership of narratives is very important in what I've been able to see within the last 5 years, because I need to figure out, how do I contribute to how we speak about ourselves, so that then the outside world also knows how to acknowledge us as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think the work that you're doing is super important and wonderful for the next generation of young artists and creative professionals to
Yeah.
see. And hopefully, it's the kind of work that really does inspire more people to learn about not only their own history, if these are fellow Ghanaians, but for people across the diaspora to recognize that it's important that we build our own institutions, our own foundations, and work on building things where ownership is really a part of learning and about history and unearthing history. The work happening across the continent now is really inspiring, like the things Paul
Yeah.
is doing with Decon Center, just individual people taking up the reins of wanting to build institutions and spaces where cultural production can continue to grow and develop and
Yeah.
thrive. It's just so wonderful.
Yes, no, it's very true. Sometimes you want the government to build these infrastructures or rebuild, but at the end of the day, it's on us. It's on our generations or the next generation moving forward to be able to say, oh no, as an artist, as a photographer, as an educator, as a curator, I've been able to have this experience. So how do I, within myself, contribute within my community, within my generation, to contribute to that infrastructure. Because I don't think we can build it ourselves, just because at the end of the day, we're not policymakers. And there's a lot of restraint coming from what we can do and what the government or presidents can do within the country as a whole. But I feel like, sadly, we have to take this position in our lives. And it's not the easiest journey, but it's also a very worth it experience.
Rita Mawuena Benissan, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial edition. And for the folks listening, if you have an opportunity, the Sharjah Biennial is still going on now through the middle of June. If you have an opportunity to visit Sharjah and see Rita's incredible works, I highly encourage it. Again, thank you so much for joining me,
Thank
Rita.
you.
That was my episode with Rita Mawuena Benissan. I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Rita for joining me on the show. Thank you for tuning in to this capsule season of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. These episodes were recorded both on site and remotely during the opening week and after the opening of the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial. During the episodes, you will hear the sights and sounds of the local environment from the various sites across the Emirate of Sharjah where the biennial takes place. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I'll see you next time. Stay tuned for my next episode. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love to all.